Welcome to a special episode of Swiftly Spoken, a fan-made Taylor Swift podcast in which we analyse her artistry, including her lyricism, music videos, and full album retrospectives, which is what we will be doing in this episode. As always, we're your hosts Cameron and Lisa, and we're going to be celebrating Folklore's recent second anniversary by reliving and reviewing what some have labelled as the quintessential quarantine album. For this album retrospective, we'll be going over all of the details of Taylor's 8th studio album, Folklore, by discussing its creation, themes, standout lyrical moments, and its legacy. So we'll be pulling apart the album to see just how much of an influence it has had as a quarantine creation, and how it created a shift in Taylor's genre of music and then creation post-Folklore. Throughout, we'll also be giving our personal opinions and appraisals of the album.
In terms of the creation of Folklore before quarantine and the pandemic in the spring of 2020, Taylor was slated to begin her set of festival performances, which were known as the Loverfest, which was going to run throughout all of the summer of that year. Everything was basically prepared to go. We have an episode speaking about this, how rehearsals had started, set lists were probably finalized. However, as we all know, it was ultimately postponed and then cancelled. Instead, she ended up creating Folklore, and she created this album in isolation, working remotely with her soon-to-be close collaborators, Jack Antonoff, Aaron Dessner, and of course, Joe Alwyn. Released at midnight on the 24th of July, alongside the lead, which is Cardigan, of course.
I think that this kind of announcement was such a shock. We'd never really had an album before. I remember Taylor always said herself that she never felt like she could just do a surprise drop, and she felt like she had to, tease and lead up to album releases. I think she said that during the 1989 era, and obviously that was the case with, every album before and previous to 1989, especially with Lover. The teasing and the Easter eggs pre-Lover being announced was just immense. So it was such a shock, and I remember getting, so I was actually out when Folklore was announced.
Yeah.
So I was just minding my own business. And then I came back and I turned Wi-Fi back on, and just these, it was just pinging, Taylor Swift has posted Taylor Swift. I was like, what on earth? Because that's when Instagram actually used to notify you. They don't seem to notify you anymore when you have people's notifications turned on. But back then it did. I was like, what on earth? And then I think at this point, I think all the photos had come out at this point. And I was just like, what on? And it was just like, what? It was like, oh my God. And I was just in a state of shock. And I just remember telling my mum and then messaging a couple of people what? And it hadn't hit me. And then obviously there was 8 different covers and CDs and vinyl and this. And there was a music video and a single. And it was just like, whoa. It just
all
felt
at the same time. Everything at once.
Yeah, it just did feel so Taylor Swift in terms of promo and release. And I was just like, how is this going to get, I was just like, I have no time to prepare myself. I wasn't expecting, whereas before it's it's like, oh, tomorrow is the day. It's like, no, it's like, oh my gosh, I've got less than 2 hours, 24 hours to try and prepare myself for this album, and then the aesthetics just seemed so different. And I just remember all the discussion was like, oh, she's not going to, because before Taylor's always felt like she has to have especially again with Lover, a radio single, this kind of single, this kind of song, a breakup one. And it just felt like, gosh, this doesn't feel like it's going to have any of that. The title of the album and the kind of aesthetic was like, oh, I remember everyone Safe and Sound. They're like, it's going to be an album full of songs like Safe and Sound. So it was such a exciting and new way for Taylor to announce an album. It was really, really cool.
Yeah, and I definitely think she pulled it off so well. Like she mentioned, I think it was probably in the Long Pond studio sessions, but she has said that she was so used to putting these parameters on herself, like the ones that you mentioned, like the radio single, the big pop song, the one that was going to sound great in a stadium. And then she was also so used to putting on the parameters for herself of release dates. I have to lead up to it. And originally she had planned for Folklore not to be released until 2021. In her head, she was like, okay, so it's made now. Once the pandemic is over, as we know, that was not going to happen anyway. Yeah. But yeah, so she was planning for, okay, once the situation has changed. And then she decided, you know what, this has happened. This is going on now. And I think it should be released. Another thing is that this album was so secretive and shut down. But having said that, it seems that people within her inner circle, which is something that we spoke about before, Taylor's inner circle, and Steve, the very famous Steve, knew about it somehow. So
Mm.
obviously it slipped through the cracks, because just before its release, I think it was like maybe a week or something like that, he did post some cryptic posts where he kind of put the definition of folklore and cardigan, and that was like teasing that something was coming very soon, something that none of us could have expected. So it's crazy to think how secretive she was of it, how unsure she was even herself of how it was all going to go down. But obviously there was rumblings that
Yeah,
slipped through the cracks.
it was interesting because I remember you sending them to me, and both of us being like, folklore and cardigan, what does that mean? Like, we were just like, that's
A
so
lot of people
random.
thought it meant that she was going to collaborate with Cardi B.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's
Just
interesting. No,
cardigan, yeah.
yeah, cardigan, yeah. But no, yeah, it was such a random. It was very random, and I'm sure also, again, we'll go on later to discuss it. But I'm sure also they had an awareness of like Betty, because I remember him saying about like Betty and stuff. So it's strange that it was so
Right.
secretive and
And
so
yet,
sudden, but there was
yeah,
clearly kind of some discussion going on in the music world.
the way that Taylor described this album, and I think this really adds to the fact that so many people feel that it is the quintessential quarantine album. She described it as, in isolation, my imagination has run wild, and this album is the result. A collection of songs and stories that flowed like a stream of consciousness. Picking up a pen was my way of escaping into fantasy, history, and memory. I've told these stories to the best of my ability, with all the love, wonder, and whimsy they deserve. Now it's up to you to pass them down. Which, again, lends itself brilliantly to the idea of folklore.
I think it's such a gorgeous, as always, Taylor always has a really gorgeous way of describing stuff. And I think that, that was such a lovely way of describing it, that, these are, these stories on folklore will become folklore, and, people will add new meaning to them. And because they're not necessarily about Taylor's experience, they're about these kind of made up, or not always made up, but, like these kind of stories about other characters, fictional or non-fictional. And it's just such a lovely way of describing it. And, she's passing them down to her fans, who will then, they will become part of their lives and add new meaning, and then they will pass them on to someone else. And I think it's just a really lovely way of describing it, and such a cool, it was just so exciting. It was just like, this is so different. It just felt so different to previous Taylor releases.
It really did, but at the same time it felt really earnest, like it felt like it fit in that point in time.
Yeah, definitely.
Even though the music scene at that moment was so different, like people were postponing, people had to cancel a lot of things. A lot of albums didn't come out because artists who really wanted that rollout decided to either put them off or change their plans, do different kind of releases. I think you told me about Kelsea Ballerini's release.
Yeah, so she was released her third album, Kelsea, and literally the week that the world shut down, and the album was intended for like a big tour and a big stadium, big promo, and obviously she didn't get that. So later on, she decided to kind of go back and re-record lots of the songs in a new light, more kind of artistic way, change up lyrics, melodies, and then Ballerini, so both together make up her name, which is quite a cool concept. And they're kind of more for sitting down, with the coffee and a new perspective. And some of them are, it's just really interesting. It gives them a new perspective, and a perspective that is more, in line and in tune with things like folklore, and the fact that people are inside their houses and enjoying music in different ways rather than in stadiums and clubs. So this is kind of the same, like you said. It really kind of fit with the time, folklore, and its release, and its kind of the way that it was presented to us was really kind of quintessentially quarantine, and of isolation and a kind of reflectiveness. So it's a really interesting way of promoting it.
In line with this, it's her first album where Taylor openly leans into storytelling from different perspectives and creating interconnected songs, like the famous love triangle that we'll get into. And the album was very much inspired by other pieces of art, different films and books that she was reading at that point during quarantine. And again, I think this really captures that feeling of that year, because we were all stuck and we all kind of just threw ourselves into different things, be it reading those books that we had sitting on our shelves for years, or watching all these films that we hadn't watched before that we really wanted to get into. And I think Taylor lived through that in the same way, and then made an album that lent itself to this escapism, into all these different characters and all of these different lives. But at the same time, it was still very much Taylor. It still has her essence to it, where you can still see her life threaded through it in such an honest way.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I think, yeah, that period in time, everyone was using stories and other worlds to escape, and I think that, yeah, folklore was a way of that. And I think another album that maybe lended itself during that time was Dua Lipa's Future Nostalgia, and it was kind of the polar opposite to folklore, really. This kind of big pop album that people were escaping into, you know, to kind of have this fun pop moment, whereas folklore was kind of the more, you know, sit down and think about things, and it was more kind of, you know, slower and calmer. And I think those two were the kind of the two big quarantine albums, and I've seen a lot of discussion about them and how they are kind of the defining quarantine albums. And, you know, even silly things like Animal Crossing, people were using to escape into these different worlds. So it was yeah, same here. It was interesting that, you know, this was the case with Taylor as well, that she then drew inspiration from the things that she was escaping into to then create something else for her and her fans and listeners to escape into as well.
It's funny to think of in that way, but all of these things did kind of align in a way for folklore to become what it was, for Animal Crossing to become what it was. You know what I mean? It's just funny how these things kind of lined up that way. I'm not saying that necessarily it was good things, but in those cases, all of us made the best out of the situation. And I think Taylor really took the opportunity to release something that captured that sentiment so well. This was the first time that Taylor worked with Aaron Dessner, who later became one of her staple collaborators. She had spoken to him previously at his band The National's concert back in 2019. And she, in that conversation, asked him about his songwriting. And he said that many of his band members, because they lived so far away from each other, they would create instrumental music tracks, send them to Matt Berninger, who is like the main lyricist, and he would write over them, and then they'd send it back and forth and kind of work like that. So when quarantine came around, Taylor remembered this conversation, and that is ultimately how Folklore was worked on, and why she got in contact with Aaron Dessner and then created a home studio to do so.
I think, again, that's such a kind of natural creation, the fact that it was almost like, oh, I remember how Aaron said that he created music and that would be perfect right now. And it's interesting that conversation, I just think, imagine if that conversation hadn't happened. It's almost like you said, it's almost like everything kind of aligned.
Everything lines up, yeah.
And I just think, imagine I've always thought about it, what would have happened if, say, you know, Love and Fest did go ahead and, you know, the world had continued how it was. Like, what would have been next for Taylor? Like, where would she have creatively gone? Would we have just gone into
I really don't know. I really don't know if Folklore, and by extension Evermore, would ever have become a thing, or would ever have become this specific thing.
Yeah, exactly. Or if she would ever worked with Aaron, you know, whether that would ever have been a place where she felt like, oh, you know, it's just really interesting. It is so interesting how it really aligns up, and how now Aaron has become a staple in Taylor's career and is now helping to, you know, rewrite her history in terms of the Taylor's versions, you know, the impact he has, and obviously the impact he has for more, and even songs like Carolina and stuff, which was obviously written during this period. It's really interesting how, yeah, he has such a now integral part of Taylor's songwriting and lyrics and creation and music. It's just so lovely. I really love Aaron. I think he's just so lovely, and
so do I. He's such a nice person.
Such a nice person, has such lovely things to say about Taylor, and they seem to work incredibly well together. And he has such respect for her, because pre-Folklore, there was still a narrative with Taylor that, you know, her songwriting still wasn't taken very seriously, and was still a bit like, oh, she just creates pop hits, you know. Whereas I think Folklore really opened a lot of people's eyes to Taylor's lyrics and incredible lyrical skill, and then they kind of went back and looked back at her previous catalogue and got, oh no, this is something that has ran throughout her career. But Aaron really respected her, you know, lyrics and songwriting ability when it wasn't necessarily universally something that was, you know, respected. Because I really do think that Folklore definitely opened so many people's. I remember listening on the radio where there was a radio presenter talking about Folklore, and they said, like, oh, whatever you think about Taylor Swift, you really need to listen to it, because the songwriting on this album is like out of this world. I just remember thinking, like, oh, does that mean that now people are actually going to finally understand what an incredible songwriter she is, and not use it as some sort of like craft and use it as some sort of like thing that is
She's
a
writing about her
negative.
exes.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it was finally taken as, wow, she is writing these incredibly lyrical, personal, stories and stuff. And so I've always really respected Aaron as a songwriter, producer, and all the things he does, and
For
the fact
sure.
that he is so loving and creates such gorgeous music with Taylor.
Moving on now to the timeline of how the songs were written. The first song written for the album is the only one that is technically a solo write by Taylor, which is My Tears Ricochet. And Taylor has described this as an embittered tormentor showing up at the funeral of his fallen object of obsession. But just by listening to it, you can really see that the song has much more layers than that.
Yes.
And it obviously meant a lot to Taylor because she placed it as a track 5.
Yeah, which we have discussed in our track 5 episode, how Folklore has a lot of possible potentials. But obviously, My Tears Ricochet is the big standout and definitely is the most deserving. But yeah, it's very interesting that that was chosen as track 5 and was the first as well. And yeah, it's an interesting kind of opening that was the first song that then opened her up into creating the sounds and aesthetics of Folklore.
So it's funny, really, because this song was definitely written before everything fell into place, but it marks all of them. It touches on all of the major themes that we're going to see run throughout Folklore, like the loss of her masters, the description of these very personal situations in such a poetic and zoomed out way. It's just funny how she was already kind of planting these seeds, and then with the collaboration of Jack and then eventually Aaron, they really kind of all came together. But it's definitely, it shows that she was heading in that direction anyway.
Definitely, yeah. It is interesting how it kind of opened the floodgates unintentionally, maybe, to what Folklore then became. So it seems like initially during the creation, Taylor kind of worked on some songs with Jack Antonoff, who she had previously collaborated with for 1989, Rep, Lover, and Sweeter Than Fiction, obviously. And then they wrote 5 tracks for Folklore, and Jack produced 7 tracks in total on Folklore.
So the first one seems to be Mirrorball, which, as we know and as we've mentioned, was written just after the cancellation of the Loverfest. We have spoken about Mirrorball previously in our Loverfest What Could Have Been episode. But yeah, this really captures the moment of her realizing, okay, it's not going to happen. Loverfest is done for, but I'm still trying to do something here. I'm still making music. I'm still, in a way, trying to get people to listen. And Jack, he compared writing Mirrorball and August to writing Out of the Woods, which is one of my favorite songs ever by them two together, especially. So it's funny because I see Mirrorball and August so different, but at the same time, I get what he means. It is like the typical Jack Antonoff production. But definitely
it's kind of the big chorus, isn't it? I think with Jack,
you're right.
Big chorus and then the bridge like goes
off. That Mirrorball bridge.
So I think Mirrorball bridge, August bridge, obviously the Out of the Woods bridge. So I think that's I can see them, and I think we've mentioned before how certain Jack Antonoff songs like seem to align with each other throughout Taylor's kind of 1989 onwards.
Yeah, there's a pipeline.
Definitely, yeah. And I think August and Out of the Woods are definitely in that line, and I think I can definitely see Mirrorball as well. I think because of those bridges and just, I don't know, Jack's production is just always so, they always seem so vast, his production, and just so, I don't know, they seem like these kind of worlds and these little like
Definitely.
I don't know, like movies within themselves. And the fact that Mirrorball and August and Out of the Woods, just 3 stellar songs. So yeah, I definitely see those kind of all lined up.
Speaking of August, which is very apt to be speaking of it right now, it is literally so popular at the moment. And I think that's what's so great about this song. It's going to keep coming back year upon year because of the name, because of the feeling that it encompasses. But yeah, this is the first song that Taylor wrote with Jack from the love triangle. So before we got Cardigan, before we got Betty's perspective, August is like the main girlie, if you think about it.
She's the OG of the love triangle.
And this is like the first time that Taylor's written from the point of view, or perhaps not exactly the first, because I guess we have some tinges of that in the Babe music video. But from writing a song, it's like the first time that she's written from the point of view of what we would call like the other woman.
Yeah, the other girl, yeah. And
Yeah.
Taylor then kind of, in the Long Pond session, kind of debunked, didn't she, how there's always this idea that it's the other girl's fault, but what if the other
Mm,
girl wasn't aware and was actually really invested and thought that they had something, and then they were the one that was also kind of left in the lurk and in the dark and weren't aware of what they were doing and that there was another person involved, and that,
exactly.
this kind of the other girl concept actually isn't very true in reality, which is quite interesting when you think about songs like Better Than Revenge and stuff that have a lot of
Mm,
discussion about
exactly.
this idea that, oh, she's kind of taking it out on this girl, whereas actually it's the guy's fault for deciding to do that. So it's interesting that Taylor has now written and understands that kind of new perspective and that has more nuance to that kind of trope. And August is
Definitely.
a really gorgeous description of that, and and I'm so glad that it is like, ironically, even though it feels more lead singly than Cardigan.
It does. I was about to say, this is
Yeah,
the song that has the most potential to be a lead single traditionally because of its pop sound. It
yeah,
is just so
definitely,
pop sounding. It really
exactly.
soars in the production, that bridge as well. I mean, it's
And
not
it's
like
like
a
and it is
quintessential,
probably the
but yeah.
most popular off of Folklore, like definitely in
I
terms of
honestly
keep
think
coming
it
back.
does. It
Mm.
has like a group of avid supporters that
Yeah,
are so
The
on
August
side.
heads.
The August heads, yeah,
Yeah,
and it's just become more than the album. Even it has
definitely.
its moment, and I do think that this year it had its biggest streaming day since 2020. This
Yeah,
year, and for it
yeah,
to come back with such a vengeance, it really attests to not just the moment in time, because obviously, being August, it does make this album, make this song, people want to listen to it because it is the month, right?
yeah,
But it's not just that, it just captures such a nostalgic feeling that even though you maybe haven't lived through that situation, your heart really goes out to Augustine or
yeah.
August or whatever you want to call her. Like, you living in that moment with her.
Maybe one of the reasons why, obviously, Cardigan obviously did really well as a lead single.
Mm.
But I think also the fact that then it could be promoted with the Cardigan itself, and then
Yeah.
help, like we've mentioned, there's kind of with Taylor's now of the promo of Taylor's album, it's almost like there's a symbol that goes with it, to kind of
Mm.
help with the promo of it, with like red and the scarf and things like that. So I think maybe that's why, but and I don't know how it would have been so easy to promote a song in July
Right.
called
Yeah,
August,
called August. It's true, it's true.
So yeah, it kind of makes sense, but it is interesting how it has now become like the song from
Mm.
Folklore,
Yeah.
whereas initially it wasn't, obviously the lead or didn't have that kind of treatment.
Another song that is also written from the point of view of what would be like the other woman or the other person is Illicit Affairs, where Taylor really does lean into that trope of being like hiding away something, where she has spoken about hiding relationships beforehand, like for example in I Know Places, but
Yeah,
this is obviously from a different perspective and point of view, which again just shows her maturity and how she's looking at these situations through the eyes of different people now. And songs like these, though you know that they could have another song, for example, August and Cardigan, and your heart goes out to both of them, you can't help but feel bad. Like in Illicit
mm,
Affairs, when the bridge hits, "Don't call me kid, don't call me baby," it's like
yeah.
it gets to you because you're with them, even though maybe they're not in the right.
Yeah, it is. It is definitely that, and that's the thing that's quite interesting with Folklore is that it comes from perspectives where maybe you wouldn't have supported that perspective before
Mm,
because you weren't maybe aware of it, or there wasn't many songs say written from that perspective because it's not something that is maybe deemed a popular thing to do. You know what I mean? Like a popular a perspective to write
right.
from, because
Yeah,
it
yeah.
maybe is a bit more of a negative. Maybe they're kind of the bad guy in the situation. So it's interesting to write from that perspective, and to write from the other girl perspective with August, and write from someone that's having an affair and is having to keep it secret, and that actually, even though maybe what they're doing isn't correct, their feelings are still valid and are still emotional, and it's really interesting. And I think that this kind of cluster of songs, um, with Illicit Affairs and August and Cardigan, they really have such a nuanced way of describing relationships. And these things are real. People do this. This is a real experience. Even if Taylor is writing from a fictional
Yeah,
perspective,
for
they're
sure.
just so cool. And I think that's why Folklore is
Mm.
just such a gorgeous lyrical album, because it really does come
And
from it sheds new light on situations or
it
perspectives
does.
that Taylor's never really written about.
But I think we've mentioned this before in one of our Red episodes, but we've spoken about how Illicit Affairs, funnily enough, really goes hand in hand with All Too Well. Like,
Yes.
if you listen to that, like, Don't Call Me Kid, Don't Call Me Baby, look at this godforsaken mess that you've made me, you show me colours, you know I can't see with anyone else, and then you listen to All Too Well, and it's like, you know, you said that we didn't work out because of how young I was. Back to back, these songs really take on a whole new
Yeah,
meaning.
and then even things like I Almost Do, where it's like, yeah, we made such a mess, babe.
Oh my
And with
god,
illicit
yeah.
affairs, does. I do think that Taylor was really drawing on. She was
Yeah.
definitely from a fictional perspective drawing on
Yeah.
kind of, you know, stories and
Moments.
stuff. But I definitely think also she was
Flashes.
pulling in things of, because you know you can kind of step back into place and be like, oh, how did I feel, you know, and pull that from there. And no, it
Yeah.
is really interesting. And yeah, I do think there is definitely a crossover, like you said, with some of those Red songs, and the feelings that were emoted in those are then kind of shared in the folklore songs.
Another song that we can connect to a different song on Folklore, which is This Is Me Trying, connected to Mirrorball. It also deals with like addiction, mental health, and the way that Taylor describes it in the Long Pond studio sessions when she speaks with Jack about it is so earnest, and it's a really tough song to listen to, honestly,
Oh
for a
yeah,
lot of people
and you
because of
can
a
really
lot of different
see,
reasons.
yeah, you can really see the emotion as well that Taylor has while describing it, and it's kind of one of the really hard hitting points of that, um, like documentary music film on Disney Plus,
Mm.
because yeah, when she's describing it, you can really see the emotion in her explaining it. You know, the things about mental health, and that, you know, every day some people are just trying just to get through the day, and like for them, for other people that might seem like they're not really doing anything and they're not progressing, but for them they're really, you know, they're putting their all in just to survive that day and move on to the next and
Mm.
stuff. It's a really kind of, yeah, you can really see the emotion that even Taylor herself has describing this song, and especially singing it. Yeah, it's a really kind of tough one on the album to get through.
Speaking about this song, Jack Antonoff said that This Is Me Trying relates to the entire album. Maybe I'm reading into it too much from my own perspective, but I think of the whole album as an exercise in working through these stories, whether personal or old, through someone else's perspective. Which again is something that we can see throughout the album, and we're going to speak about a bit more when we get into themes. It's going through all these things and sometimes having to escape into these third person narratives, but through them there is our own stories. Like we find ourselves in them, even if it's just these tiny little tinges, and it helps. It really does, and
Yeah,
that's why I think again it's just such a good quarantine album, because when we were in quarantine, you can't do much. You know what I mean? You're sitting by
yeah,
yourself, and a lot of the time you're lost in your own thoughts, and you do have some darker thoughts.
yeah.
And an album such as this, even though it's hard hitting, even though it's hard to get through at times, does help you to work through them in a way. The fifth and final song that was written by Jack and Taylor together is The Lakes, which is a song that we have spoken about previously in our ranking Taylor Swift remixes episode, because we spoke about the original version versus the final production version, and we both basically agreed that that final production, the more stripped back version, actually does work better in our opinions, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it has. Even though the production is still quite large and broad, it
Mm,
did feel. And Taylor kind of said herself that, I think Jack said that Taylor said that she felt like the strings and stuff was just all too much. It needed pulling back a bit, the kind of
mm,
orchestral feel. So yeah, no, I definitely prefer the original, the final production. Sorry, the folklore version in comparison to the
mm.
original, more orchestral sound. But this song is really, really gorgeous, and I've kind of, again, this song kind of pulls from Taylor's kind of personal
Yes.
kind of perspective of her trip to the lakes, which is then obviously mentioned within other songs on Folklore with Invisible String, and mentioning that trip with obviously the waitress and stuff, which we'll go on to mention later. But no, that
Mm.
I really love this song, and the fact that I think this also really encapsulates Folklore, and the fact that it's kind of this escapism and escaping to a place that is quieter and more subdued, and you know, the fact that you're enjoying moments without necessarily sharing them with the internet and stuff, with the seeing a rose rise up and not feeling like you have to tweet about it, and
Mm.
having more of a kind of personal experience with nature and the environment. And I think that Folklore is kind of definitely, as a theme, that's
It's
something that is
definitely
kind of comes
encapsulated,
across.
yeah.
Yeah, and I
A
think
lot of
it's a
people
really gorgeous
also sorry.
final song. I'm really glad that
Mm,
that is now the official final song with the release of the CD, and then obviously it got put on streaming. Because I always felt like the original with Hoax was the original close.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
always felt like it was a strange close and didn't really, and kind of left me in the lurch a bit. It was almost
Hanging a
like,
bit.
oh yeah, it doesn't really feel like a, because Taylor's always very specific about the final song and what is the kind of close. And with songs like Clean and Daylight, they're kind of these perfect closures to albums. And I did feel like, a bit like, okay. But the Lakes really felt like this kind of big moment at the end that really closed the album perfectly and wrapped up all the themes. And just, I don't know, I really like the Lakes anyway as a song, but especially as a closure. I think it's a real standout.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I think you've really hit the nail on the head there, saying that it kind of like summed everything up. And a lot of people were a bit funny about it having these mentions of like these hunters with cell phones with no one around to tweet it, and the Wordsworth part, and you know, at the same time as giving all of these beautiful poetic descriptions of the Lakes, she's kind of adding in these little interruptions of real life things and things that are very personal to her. And I love that. I think it's a great little interruption. I know it is an interruption, but it's very purposefully done. And I'm very glad that she got a little jab in as well with the lyrics.
Definitely,
So,
me too. The thing that I did find quite funny, and I remember the first time I listened to it, which again I think we mentioned in our previous episode about CDs, was that the first time we listened to it was through some strange live stream or someone was playing from their CD player.
We did, yeah.
But I remember thinking, what on earth are half those words? And the fact that even Taylor mentioned it, that like the starter pack for Folklore was the English dictionary. And I think Lakes is the song that you're like, what? You know, Aurora and sad prose, all these kind of, mentions of
elegies
things.
And eulogies.
Yeah, it was all like, wow, like where are you, you've really gone through the Oxford Dictionary and yanked out some very impressive words. So no, yeah, that was quite funny that even Taylor herself kind of mentioned that. Incredibly, a real standout lyrically on Folklore as well. With the like Wordsworth, like what are my words?
The play on words.
It's just so clever. It's a real standout, and I'm very glad that it then is now a Folklore track. Whereas for a week or so it wasn't, until we got the CDs.
Yeah.
But no, it was a really, really impressive one. Definitely a standout for me. So in April, Taylor reached out and began collaborating with Aaron Dessner remotely. He sent her lots of folders full of musical tracks and instrumentals that Taylor remotely began working on. Even though Aaron thought that she would take a while to work on some of these, it took Taylor just a couple of hours to send him back voice memos and lyrics to fully written songs. So Aaron himself said that, so I just sent her a folder full of I'd done recently and was excited about. Hours after she sent back a full written version of Cardigan, it was like a lightning bolt struck the house. And I just think that, again, the way that Aaron has so much respect for Taylor and her songwriting, and it is incredible that Taylor wrote that so quickly. I think that Aaron said he went for a run. I think he sent it to her, went out for a run, and came back.
There's a few that we're going to discuss where literally in the span of a couple of hours, she sent him a message saying, oh yeah, here's a fully fledged song. And that's exactly what happened with Cardigan. It's crazy how, which eventually became the lead and is a very big part of Folklore, she just received the piece of music. The piece of music was titled Maple, which I think fits so perfectly. And just a couple of hours later, she sent back a little voice note and the lyrics and was like, there you go.
I think also what's quite interesting is clearly from the offset, Taylor felt very comfortable with Aaron's writing, because previously when you've heard other voice notes, they're normally slightly tentative. She's like, this is an idea, and this might work, and she kind of has to almost over-explain it.
And with Aaron, she was just like, here you go.
Here we go. Yeah, there's the whole track. And clearly she felt very comfortable that he understood her and understood her writing and wouldn't question it and wouldn't be like, not sure. Because in other voice notes, say for like I Know Places on the 1999 CD, she's kind of like, this is an idea, but we can always, I just send ideas just in case, but, we might change it up when we get into the studio, and I don't want to get into a studio and then be like, I'm not keen on that. So, going into the studio sends out some audios and stuff with people. So it's really interesting that she felt so comfortable with Aaron to just kind of send back like, here's the whole song. And obviously with the release of the CD and then the vinyl, we got to hear that voice memo.
Which is so good.
So
I
gorgeous.
love hearing that.
The Golden Cage lyrics.
We got a few different lyrics that were so interesting. I always love to hear these cut lyrics and these cut little bits, and we're so lucky to get all of these little recordings, because not everyone, not every artist like to share those things with their fans, and a lot of artists don't write their own music, so they never get those type of things. But with Taylor, we're very lucky to get these little pieces that really show the background of a song and how it evolves, and even just that the changing of the wording of Peter losing Wendy, Peter leaving Wendy.
Yes.
That choice that she made is just one word, but it really echoes throughout the song and changes that vibe.
Yeah, and I love the chorus with like but I knew you living in a gold cage, sneaking to my bird cage, laughing like a damn fool, breaking every damn rule. It's just it's so interesting that how they change. But I knew you'd linger like a stolen kiss. It's just so interesting to see how these songs started and where they developed. And some of these lyrics I really wish were in the final. Like, I love the kind of bird cage, but I'm happy with some of the ones that were then added in replacement of these. But I just love hearing these voice memos, because one of my favorite, and this is totally off topic, but one of my favorite OG lyrics is from Tim McGraw, and one of the original lyrics is because some trains you can't catch again, you've just got to leave it how it was. Oh my god,
so good.
Why
There's
wasn't that
so many gems that she cut.
That lyric gives me shivers. Like, it's so visual, like you've just got to let that train go and you can't get on it, and unfortunately that's just how it is. And that experience and that kind of time with that person unfortunately is gone. And I just think that is such a gorgeous lyric, and the fact that like 15-year-old Taylor was writing that, it just shows how incredible her lyrics were. But that's one of my favorites. Some of these Cardigan ones, as well as that Tim McGraw one, are kind of top tier OG lyrics for me. But it's so interesting how quickly she wrote that. And Cardigan is such a standout track. It's such a good song.
So she actually wrote it on the 27th of April, and that is the day that she posted the infamous picture of not a lot going on right now. But of course, a lot was going on at that moment. Little did we know.
Everyone just thought it was a nice little reference to 22.
Yeah,
and it was all just kind of like, oh, that's nice that she's kind of referencing.
She literally could finish writing what would become the lead.
Yes, which is just mental, and the fact that she then teased that, and then obviously later then used that again to tease Evermore again, which we didn't expect. Like,
I know.
I thought, something might be coming. I did think, something might come, because that's weird. But nah. Again, but I never would have expected another album.
Moving on, another song that she wrote with Aaron is Seven, which is quite a polarizing song. I know a lot of people don't love this song, which I adore it. I think it's great, but I don't know. I guess
I've always loved it.
Lyrics, the lyrical content being, about being younger, perhaps. An interesting quote given by Aaron about this song is that he says, "And just like a folk song, our love will be passed on. That's what this album is doing. It's passing down. It's memorializing love, childhood, and memories. It's a folkloric way of processing." He also says that it's kind of nostalgic and emotional folk song. Even before she sang to it, I felt this nostalgia, wistful feeling in it, and I think that's what she gravitated towards, referencing Taylor writing about, being youth in Seven, and talking about like people that you know when you're younger and how you kind of grew apart from them.
I think his description is really, and is interesting, and it mimics the way that Taylor announced and released the info about folklore to the world, with the idea of it being a passing down of stories and childhood and memories, and this folklore idea, and like it's the most like the idea of this kind of like these stories being passed about and being passed down. And I think that Seven is the most like folkloric song on the album, definitely. And one of the lyrics, which I'm going to mention, I saw something about it, I'm not sure on TikTok or Instagram, I saw someone mention about like Taylor Swift lyrics that you didn't realise the meaning behind. And obviously Taylor herself has never mentioned the lyrics, so this is purely discussion based.
Speculation.
Speculation. I heard someone talk about the lyric, and I think your house is haunted because your dad is always mad, and that must be why. And the person said that like the haunted idea, obviously a child hearing the word say spirits would think of a ghost rather than say alcohol, and that it's actually referencing her friend's dad's like alcoholism, and confusing that with spirits and ghosts, and thinking, oh well, that must be why he's mad, say an alcoholic.
Wow.
And which I just thought was such a
the levels to this song.
Exactly, whether that is or isn't how Taylor intended that lyric, it just shows the kind of
how you can interpret
quality
it.
of lyric, yeah, and the fact that, and that's one of the gorgeous things about Taylor's lyrics, is that they're so personal to her, but because they are so personal and so specific, they are also so universal, because those feelings are so real and so personal that someone else can take them on and totally apply them to their life. And I think that that's why, and especially with folklore, the kind of concept of it being stories that kind of pass down, I think that, you know, that's the case with these lyrics, is that you can take them in so many different ways, even though they are, you know, might be specific to something else. And I think that, yeah, this 7 is definitely a standout for me. I've always, upon initial listen, 7 was one of my favorites.
Right.
And it, like, I still love it to this day, but it definitely isn't up there on my probably top 3 of folklore, maybe in top 5 possibly. But on initial listen, this was probably one of my favorites. I think just because of, it just felt, I don't know, I think how Aaron described it, it has this like gorgeous nostalgia and wistful kind of feeling to it. It really stood out to me first time I listened to it, which is interesting.
Definitely.
But yeah, I still love it to this day, but ironically, it's not my favorite like it was on first listen. Like, you know, when people do like their first listen ranking, I need to do that more often, actually.
Oh,
When
I'm so bad at that.
Exactly, yeah, I need to like list what is my favorite, because I would be so intrigued to go back and probably think, oh, I don't like that one anymore.
Yeah, I'd
Why did I
be
rank that as my
terrible at
favorite?
that, because I'm really bad at reacting to like
Yeah, there's
first.
so much to process. Yeah,
Yeah, it's too much for me to process, really.
I just love 7, and it really encapsulates, when I listen to it, it really encapsulates that time, you know, that July, August of 2020. Because again, I was so obsessed with that song during its initial release, that when I listen to it now, it really takes me back to that kind of time, because that was kind of all I really listened to. So that's really interesting that now it has another element of nostalgia back to that period.
Definitely. It has a lot of layers to it. It really does. You can interpret it just as like, you know, 2 kids and not really knowing, but then it has all these layers, like that spirits thing. That is something that I hadn't thought about, but it works so well. And then obviously the hide in the closet lyric, a lot of layers to that, of course. And then my favorite lyric is definitely though I can't recall your face, I still got love for you.
Yeah.
Because like there's a lot of people that come in and out your house, in and out of your life. And you know, you have that nostalgia towards them, even though you don't know where they are now or how they might be.
And yeah, I think that is always interesting about memory, that memories with like faces and stuff, they do like
fade.
It's just almost like a blank face, even though, you know, you spent so long with that person and so many years, you almost can't then picture them.
It is actually quite a sad song in a way.
Yeah,
like,
it definitely is.
But it's much more, it's deeper than a lot of people, I think, give it credit for.
Definitely,
for sure.
Definitely.
Next up, another song that she wrote alongside Aaron is Peace, which Aaron describes as being really incredibly versatile, and the song basically being formed by 3 harmonized bass lines and a pulse. The pulse was actually provided by Justin Vernon or Bon Iver, and basically Aaron works with him or has worked with him for a very long time now, so he was able to get involved through Aaron. And when Taylor first listened to it, she described the song itself as feeling very serene, like really peaceful, and that's kind of how the name came about. She thought it would be a bit too on the nose to sing about finding peace, so instead, though the song is called Peace and it sounds very peaceful, it does deal with a lot of complex feelings that really contrast with the track's calming sound.
Yeah, it's really interesting, how it kind of mentions not being able to give someone peace, even though, like,
it's
melodically,
so
it's the most, if you stripped all the lyrics and just played backing track, would be the most peaceful and calming song. And I think I've even seen things on where they've like ranked best songs to play when you're pregnant to your children, like to your, you know, unborn baby, basically, you know, your child inside of you. It's like Peace and Invisible String. They're the ones that they suggest is the best, to play.
Because the lyrics
children in the womb.
Else.
Good job. The child can't understand the lyrics, because they're probably like, "Oh my god, Mum, why the hell are you playing this?" But yeah,
what do you mean your Cascade Ocean Wave Blues?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I think because of its kind of backing track, ironically, that has become. I saw it on a ranking the other day of like best songs to play while you're pregnant. I don't know how I was suggested that,
Yeah, you're on
but
a bit
yeah,
of a strange page there, but
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think to be fair, it was a fan account. You know, those kind of
Yeah,
update ones of like, because there's not much going on in the Taylor Swift
right.
world at the moment.
Yeah.
They take anything that mentions Taylor as an update.
Yeah.
I did see that, but yeah, it's because its track is very kind of serene and peaceful.
Definitely.
Even though, like you said, its kind of lyrics definitely contrast that about not being able to offer that peaceful serenity that the background provides,
Piece was recorded in one single vocal take,
which
which,
is very
wow.
impressive. Yeah,
Yep. As always, when we get these like one take songs, like New Year's Day and things like that, it's always really incredible to hear that because, you know, there's something to be said about being able to just sit down and take such an emotionally charged song and get through it just in one take. Because I do think that Peace is the most personal song on the album.
yeah,
I really
definitely.
do think. Like, she
Yeah,
goes
along with
deep.
Invisible String,
Yeah.
and kind of My Tears Ricochet, those three I think are the real standouts in terms of
Yeah.
personal and
Yeah. There's not
vulnerability.
much hiding behind any characters here. It's
No.
literally the I that she speaks with is basically herself.
Yeah.
And yeah, that's very the vulnerability to it is quite difficult to get through in one vocal take, but she did it nonetheless. After having written these 6 or 7 songs together, Taylor kind of explained the concept of folklore to Aaron and told him about her previous work that she'd done with Jack. And thankfully, everything was tying together really well. The themes that were flowing throughout the songs written with Jack and then written with Aaron really stuck together well, and they were able to continue on constructing now what they fully knew was going to be the Folklore album. The next song that Aaron and Taylor wrote together is one that we have a full episode dedicated to. This is The Last Great American Dynasty. We really break it down, go into the history of Rebecca Harkness, go into Taylor's history with the house, and all of the lyrics on that episode. So if you do want to check that out, we speak about it a lot more there. After that, we also have Mad Woman, which is one that Aaron says that he wrote shortly after Cardigan and Seven, and he feels that is very much related in terms of sound to the sound of Cardigan and Seven. He says that he has a way of playing piano that's very melodic and emotional, but then often it's great if whoever's singing doesn't sing it exactly what's in the piano melody, but it's somehow connected in a way. Like that layering of the vocal and the piano that are slightly off, that go in different directions at times. And that's what Taylor does with these songs. And with Mad Woman, it also came with a lot of firsts for Taylor.
Yes.
For example, it was the first time that we heard her blatantly swear on a track with the F word.
Yep.
Yeah. So, and it's quite, again, very deeply personal. It goes to the theme on Folklore of, I would say, more of her personal life and more of her working life, the masters, the loss of them and things like that. And this one is very different to the sentiment of the Lakes, because this one is quite bitter. I mean, you can see, rightfully so, of course, but you can see, you know, she's laying out, she dishes some dirt and she
dishes
goes
some
in.
dirt that then later
comes out to be
true. Yeah, Taylor knew what was going on.
She
before,
knew what was up.
Yeah. But no, this song is, again, this was a bit of a standout. I think maybe for me, first listen, because of the F word. I was kind of like, oh, okay, wow, you know, like, you know, the fact that obviously Taylor opened Folklore with, you know, swearing in the one, but this was kind of the big one that was like, oh gosh, you know, you've probably
we were
gone
waiting for.
Yeah, exactly. But no, it was interesting, and yeah, definitely very personal in terms of its discussion, but also it's weird because it feels like it kind of, like you said, it has this kind of like slightly spiteful, vengeful feel that you know, Reputation was off. Some of those songs were layered with. I think, like we've mentioned before, Reputation is often kind of characterized as this vengeful, spiteful album, where actually it's not. That's kind of such a minimal theme in comparison to the other themes of, like Taylor said, finding love through noise and finding love through, you know, a difficult period in life. And it feels like, Mad Woman is almost written, it's almost like Reputation Taylor wrote the lyrics of Mad Woman, and Folklore Taylor
turned around and said, you know what, I haven't finished yet.
Exactly. Let me just one last time go in and then I'm done. But you know, I'll put a nice like piano behind it rather than, you know, kind of like a
bombastic,
or like rap beat track behind it,
Mm.
you know, like Endgame or something. So no, it's really interesting, Mad Woman. It does kind of stand out slightly from the other folklore songs, I think.
Mm.
Do you feel like that? I wouldn't really. I know that Aaron said, and obviously Aaron is the writer of the
I know, Cardigan and
instrumental.
Seven.
I would not categorize it with those two at
I
all.
think I need to listen to the instrumental on its own because Taylor's
Mm,
vocals and her and the lyrics especially, I mean, they
yeah,
kind of do overshadow. But I guess the piano line, yeah, is so overshadowed by just
that's what I
that.
mean. Yeah, I
You
find
know
it quite a
what?
strange like, I
Yeah,
would
it's
never personally paired it with Cardigan or Seven.
if anything, I'd compare it perhaps to the sentiment of the last great American dynasty of
Mm,
being, unabashedly, this is how you've made me, and
yeah,
it's okay to show my rage and to show these facets of myself
self.
as a
Yeah.
woman, especially in the music industry, especially.
Mm,
Because a lot of people do say that Taylor is quite outspoken on certain things,
yeah.
but she needs to be in many cases, and so do many other artists need to be. And I think this is an empowering song in that sense that gives a lot of people, a voice and being like, no, it's okay. There's nothing like a mad woman, and it's okay. It's a shame she went mad. That's what they'll say, but
Yeah.
you poke the bear, and here she is.
And yeah, it's reference to the loss of masters, and I always found it interesting.
Hmm.
Of like, do you see then referencing about how her face is now, will now be like on
Yeah, the
uh,
neighbors lawn.
yeah, the neighbor's lawn of like, Republic Records, because especially in Nashville and stuff, I think that a lot of the studios and stuff are all down like one big street, and like because they always do things of like congrats,
Promotional.
yeah,
Yeah.
like promotional banners and stuff. So yeah, it's a very kind of definitely personal song. And again, like all the songs on Folklore, very vivid, and just when you hear these songs, they're just so, I don't know, they're just, when I hear them, they are just that you can just visualize them so well. And I think Mad Woman is one of those songs you can just really visualize with the metaphor of poking this bear, and this just really gorgeous song. And I think one
Mm.
that does kind of get a bit lost though in Folklore.
There's just so much going on in folklore, so many
Mm,
themes. It does kind of stick out. And it's funny that we should mention Reputation because in our songs that fit on other albums episode, we did say that Mad Woman could have been placed on Reputation. Like it is a return to kind of some of the themes that she explores there. So maybe because of that, thematically, even though it does speak about the big theme, one of the big themes in folklore, which is the loss of the masters, it does have a different kind of side to it that maybe perhaps that's why.
yeah, I think maybe, or maybe just its placement on the track list, maybe in between like Invisible String and Epiphany,
Right, which
is
is so
kind of
different.
very peaceful. That, you know what I mean? They
Yeah.
have a bit more of a kind of, I don't know. I just always feel like it. Weirdly for me, it kind of gets a little bit lost, and I almost every so
Mm.
often when I listen to Folklore in full, I'm like, oh yeah, Mad, or on shuffle, I'll be like, oh gosh, I forget about this song.
Next up, we have Epiphany, which basically Taylor writes about two stories that kind of mix in this song. One is the experiences of her grandfather, Dean, landing at Guadalcanal in 1942, and the other is the situation that many healthcare workers had to live through during the pandemic. And these two experiences are meshed together perfectly. And from a linguistic perspective, it's really interesting how she picked out these two experiences to put together. There was a lot of studies conducted into how war metaphors were used quite often to kind of describe the situation that we were living through, and especially the situation, in hospitals and in medical centers. So she obviously must have picked up on that and does a fantastic job at threading them two stories together and showing like the devastating nature of them
Mm. And the
and
nature
putting
of
it
the
all
fact that
together.
they're such tough experiences to get through, that they're experiences then people
Mm.
can't discuss about.
No, it's
And
hard to talk
yeah,
about and it's hard to relive.
yeah, and yeah, it's a really interesting, like you said, kind of drawing a line between those two very different experiences that also have similarities. And but I think because it's quite tough and hard hitting, it's not one that I listen to often unless I'm going through Folklore.
Right? Definitely.
Um,
I think that the same thing happens to me with both Epiphany and Marjorie. They're very
yeah,
difficult things to get through because they're so personally touching in different ways.
yeah,
But it is difficult. And I can imagine it for a variety of manners. It is a song that it's kind of like Ronan on Red.
yeah, definitely.
It's hard because everyone loves the song, and obviously we know that these are needed songs, but
Mm,
they receive less streams, not because of anything else, but because like Soon You Get Better, it's just they're so difficult to listen to because they
yeah.
are so hard hitting.
But what's quite interesting though is that a photo of Taylor's grandfather was included in the Cardigan music video.
Hmm.
You see it briefly, and I think the Cardigan music video, its Easter eggs aren't anything near like Lover ones, you know,
Right.
like where it's just
But
like you
then
could,
the
or like Reputation, where it's like you literally like hit pause every second and there's another 10.
oh my
They're a bit
god,
more
yeah.
kind of subtle and subdued in comparison, and only really in that cabin, the kind of Easter eggs. That's kind of where most of them are.
The background
But
stuff,
yeah,
you know.
there is a couple. But yeah, he is in the which is a nice kind of nod to Epiphany and her grandfather, and it's
Definitely.
nice that both her grandparents had an influence on, say, Folklore and then later Evermore, which is quite nice. Family. That's the thing that's quite nice about Folklore as well. It kind of feeds into the idea of the family and
Yeah,
you know,
family
stuff being
oriented.
passed around and you
Definitely.
know, stories and stuff is and the stories then merging, I suppose, with Epiphany as well. The kind of stories of war and the pandemic then merging into this song, and it's Epiphany again is one. All of the songs are just so typically Folklore because obviously they're also thought out and
Right.
by Taylor. You know, they're not just kind of mashed
But
together. And
it goes to show that
yeah,
she really did select them
yeah,
correctly.
definitely.
In terms of sound of Epiphany, I'd like to mention just a couple of things that Aaron said, because it's interesting. He said the sound is like a giant stack of harmonies, and he added piano for more of a cinematic trope. And that really leans into, like, I was watching The Wilds recently, and the first episode of the second season features Epiphany in this very dramatic moment. I won't give spoilers, but it fits so well, like with this cinematic trope. And I was like, oh my god, this is perfect. So I really get what he means. He also said he wanted to give it an Icelandic sound with distended chords, and almost like this classical feeling. And funny enough, he also says that the sound he wanted to kind of like have some weird mesh between Kate Bush and Peter Gabriel, which is very, you know, funny to mention Kate Bush
Yeah.
at this point in time when she's become such a big hit thanks to Stranger Things. Next up, we have my personal favorite on the album because I'm just that romantic, I guess. All of these sad songs, I was like, no, I want the only happy one.
Oh yeah.
Invisible String, which is such a beautifully made song. I love it so much. It is another, again, very personal, blatantly personal, but it's just so good. In terms of the music behind it, I think it's so interesting because there's a live stream that Aaron did on Instagram, which was way before Folklore, where he plays the music and he has different lyrics to it, which are completely different to the direction that Taylor takes it in. And it's just so funny to see that that existed out in the world for such a long time, and then Taylor took it, and she did really, really change it. She really did. So it existed a long, long time before, and then yeah, Taylor obviously took it and made it very personal. And I don't know, I really love the idea of. I know a lot of people are like, "Oh, bad was the blood," but I just think it's.
Oh no,
so
I
good.
quite like the idea that it references that, and I think it's quite a nice, again, how we've mentioned before, with all the girls, obviously a
Yes.
supposed reject from Lover. The themes of that definitely link with Invisible String, but Invisible String describes it in much more of a poetic way, rather than, you know, if you hadn't broke up with all these people, we wouldn't have ended up together. It's nicer to think that you're always going to end up together, and there was this piece of string that was threading you together throughout your life. And little did you know, at the end, it came together, and all of those connections made sense. And it is quite nice. And again, referencing the Cardigan music video, and then obviously the Willow music video, the idea of this golden thread,
literal string,
is quite nice there as well. But no, I really, really love the Invisible String. Again, the lakes are mentioned with their holiday, and
that waitress.
She said herself,
she's my favorite character.
that she was just like, oh, you look like an American singer, and then the fact that then, you know, a year or so later Taylor then put that in a song, and that's something that stuck with her. I bet she was like, oh god, here we go, and then it was like, oh no, and they had no clue. It must have actually been quite nice to actually be recognized.
I love that. I just love that little tidbit, like the things that she just adds in. Also, like, you know, now I send their babies presents. It's just so good.
Exactly.
Like the growth that she shows, like, oh, it's just so good. So good.
And then releases Mr. Perfectly Fine.
Well,
like a year later, But no,
we love to see it, really.
It is really nice. It is, this song definitely does show a lot of growth and maturity in terms of relationships, and it's just such a lovely metaphor that that you're linked with someone, and at some point your string kind of you join together and realize, oh, all along it was supposed to be you. Yeah, it is quite sweet.
I love it.
It is very sweet. So the third writer and collaborator on Folklore who we knew for a long time as William Bowery, is Joe Alwyn. And I think the name William Bowery was taken. I think William was taken from father.
Yeah.
And Bowery was wasn't it the hotel that they stayed in a lot, which is quite nice. And I think there was a lot of discussion, wasn't there? Like, who is that? Because people were like, well, he basically doesn't exist.
Right.
It was.
I think they did the right thing, though, definitely. Because
oh yeah, I think so.
With an album, distance
him initially,
album.
so that it wasn't just all like, oh, it's all about Joe, and then
this is a song that she wrote with her new boyfriend.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I think now clearly, they feel comfortable enough in the relationship and are stable enough, and it's long term enough that Taylor then felt comfortable to mention who it actually was, and then obviously at the Grammy said that it was Joe, and now that isn't a kind of hidden thing, and even Joe's spoken about writing some of these songs, but I think upon its initial release, it was quite nice.
It was a good idea.
Kind of keep it more like, oh, who is that? Yeah, I think also what's quite interesting is that considering Joe isn't a songwriter, and this isn't his profession, and isn't something that I don't know if he will continue to write songs. These two songs are like some of the best, and he wrote the choruses and
I know,
some of the best bits of these songs. It's like, Joe, I think you should continue writing
songs.
Yeah,
Joe. Maybe you should release an album, Joe.
Yeah, they're impressive, really impressive. Exile is such a standout on Folklore, such a
and
gorgeous,
he wrote the
gorgeous
piano
song.
line as well.
Yeah, really,
so that
really
means
impressive.
It's not just the vocal or the lyric, but the actual piano line is quite a beautiful one on Exile, and it really leads the song. So for him to just be sitting there playing around, and this is what they came up with. Goodness.
Yeah, it's so impressive. But what's quite interesting is there is a recording of them singing it together, and there is a draft of Taylor singing both parts, which I would love to hear.
So bad.
Yeah, I would love to hear Taylor singing both parts. That would just be so interesting. But I'm very glad that it was a duet in the end with Bon Iver, Justin Vernon, and I just. And then he added one of the coolest parts as well to the song, which is so Step Right Out. So I just love that it was such a collaborative, and that's the thing with Folklore as well. It was such a collaboration between Taylor and Justin and Aaron and Joe and Jack. It was a slightly smaller kind of group,
focus group,
than normal, but such a collaboration between all of them, and that some of the songs that Taylor and Joe wrote, Jack and Aaron both produce, or Jack might have written a bit and then Aaron produces. It's just it feels very collaborative. Justin's voice sounds so good with Taylor's. They really match.
I'm glad that he enjoyed it. Just for them, for Joe and Taylor to reach out to someone who they kind of idolize and listen to
and we're a bit nervous about.
Exactly. Just that story makes it so good. But then they really picked out the right person for this song. His voice fits so well. That So Step Right Out part that he added, brilliant. Like you said, it was such a collaborative effort, especially with this song, but it worked out really, really well.
Another song that Joe co-wrote is Betty, and this is my favourite song on Folklore. Betty.
Isn't that crazy?
Love this song so much, and the fact that Joe
you're a Joe Alwyn stan.
I am. I genuinely think I am. I think Joe Alwyn needs to write more songs, because I just love Betty. Is for me, I think because it felt so nostalgic to Mary's song. It just felt it weirdly felt like an unreleased debut song or something. It just felt like those kind of songs that were so storytelling and country. I'm a massive country music fan, so it just felt like such a lovely return back to kind of country Taylor, and the fact that Taylor caught Joe just casually singing parts of it and then was like,
crazy,
this might be weird, but do you want to write this song together? I'm so glad she did. And
who comes up with that though? Who's just in their kitchen just if I just show up at the party, would you want
exactly
me?
I just,
that's wild.
It is wild, and I love it. And this song is produced by both Jack and Aaron, who just did an incredible job.
Another really collaborative effort between the team,
Definitely.
Which I think really lends to the fact that it wasn't just one of them, it was the four of them going in. And obviously country isn't really what Jack usually does, and not really what Aaron usually does. So I think they all worked with it together really well.
Yeah, and that final kind of bridge chorus, I just love
so good
much. rhyming cardigan with car again, you know,
Cardigan.
like,
Oh,
it's so
magical.
I just love it. I literally adore that song so, so, so much.
The last two songs written for Folklore were, funnily enough, the one which became the first song and Hoax, which became the last song on the album until eventually we got the deluxe version. But she wrote them both in the span of a few hours.
Mental.
So
Crazy.
it's crazy.
Yeah.
Aaron mentions how they thought the album was complete, but Taylor went back into the folder one last time and she just came up with these two songs. I think Aaron says that she didn't really realize that if they were going to be for now or for the future, but as soon as they were done, she was like, oh my god, we need these songs on the album. And they literally turned into the opener and the closer of the album.
Yeah, which is interesting, isn't it?
That is crazy. It's almost as if she knew we need something. We need
there's
something to
something
open.
missing. I wonder what would have been the opener and closer then. Say
Right.
if the
Maybe
one
things
and
would be
Hoax
completely mixed.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, I wonder if the track list had been decided and those two were just added into the top and bottom, or whether it really reshifted the kind of track list. It is interesting. I would really like to know what the kind of, because I'm someone that's always really liked track listing. I think that a track list really,
and what goes into it,
yeah, really kind of does like make an album flow or not. Like I think that when there's a track list that is just confusing, it doesn't help. You know what I mean? And sometimes you have to pull yourself out and take the songs as individual rather than as a collective.
I think we've spoke about this before, but Lover really suffers from that.
Yeah, I do
strangely
think so, yeah.
chaotic track listing.
Yeah.
Perhaps there's a slight change.
But then people always argue that Red has a pretty chaotic track listing.
It does.
All Too Well going into 22. But now it kind of makes sense with the 21 and the 22.
Yeah.
But I always felt like even though Red's track list was slightly confusing, there was, I don't know, it didn't feel as chaotic, say, as Lover's track listing for me personally. So I've always been a bit into like the way that track listing is, and because artists put songs in order for a specific reason. Whenever I listen to an album for the first time, I have to listen to it in order because it was put in that order for a reason.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. I would
really
like to
track listing is the reason that track fives in Taylor's world became a thing.
Such a thing, yeah. I think with Taylor, like openers, closers, and track fives are like massive.
The important ones.
So the fact that so late on she decided the opener, closer,
right.
And basically, the first song she wrote was track 5. It's just quite interesting that they
how it all fit in the end.
The kind of the core songs in terms of track listing were all decided right at the start and right at the end.
That's crazy.
All written right at the start and right at the end. But yeah, very interesting.
In terms of lyrical content for them, the one is a really great opener because it really introduces this world of not really her, but her speaking through someone else, but at the same time, parts of her. And then Hoax, you need to listen to the whole album to be able to get to Hoax.
Yeah.
Without all of what comes before it, you couldn't really just go and listen to Hoax as the first song because you'd be so confused and what the hell's going on. But Hoax kind of is that culmination of all of these feelings on the album kind of coming into one.
And I think also Taylor described the one quite well with saying that it was almost like saying, oh, hey, like, I'm doing good, I'm on some new shit, like, it's just,
I'm out here.
Yeah, it's like, it's almost like just being like, yeah, I'm all good, and now I'm just gonna, like, break your heart 20 million times with this, like, really emotional album. So, yeah, here we go. Like I said, I do really like Hoax, but I am glad that it is not now the closer.
Right.
Because I do much prefer the Lakes as a closer.
Yeah, it works well, but the Lakes just gives it that final.
It kind of ties it. It's a bit like with Evermore, and like if Right Where You Left Me was the ending, it'd be like, oh, because it leaves you with that kind of hanging feeling of like, I was never given closure and no ending. Whereas like It's Time to Go is like, okay, this is all of this. I've got myself back, and now I'm going to move on to the real. It has a real closure to it.
I like that.
So no, I think that that's the same with the Lakes. It just really kind of is like, yep, done now.
We have spoken about these things as we've gone through the songs, but Folklore had a lot of firsts for Taylor. It was her first ever surprise drop. It was her first album that had an explicit label on it, where we've spoken about the F-bomb. There's no real pop bop. Again, we've spoken about August, but it doesn't become the lead. Many of these songs aren't traditionally radio-friendly songs since they have such flowery language. And, like you said, Folklore Starter Pack a dictionary.
Yeah.
And in a way, this helped her because there was no limitations for the track list and supposedly no real personal songs, so it must have been very freeing for her. But of course, as we know and as we've discussed, in reality, there is a lot of personal layers that she was able to kind of sneakily add into folklore under the guise of them being, oh, they're all, kind of different people. Moving on to overarching themes throughout the album. Again, we've spoken about many of these as we've gone through. The first major one being escapism, which of course lends perfectly to the time in which it was released. And I think that's why folklore became such a big thing. It just worked perfectly for people escaping. Imagery is another big theme, which Taylor literally has an image that popped into her head as she was writing for almost all of these songs. The cardigan, which, like you said, Cameron, works perfectly for selling the album.
Oh, definitely. It's funny how Taylor did make everyone wear like
that
winter
cardigan
cardigans during July. She like made it like a fashion trend. And the fact that like now, even to this day, like this is again off topic, but like Sainsbury's in the UK have recently released a cardigan that is like a total knockoff, like literally identical to the official Taylor Swift cardigan that you can get for like 25 quid. So if you are in the UK, Sainsbury's is selling knockoff cardigans for 25 quid. Because I've seen it on TikTok being like, oh my God, go to Sainsbury's. So like the fact that it's still a fashion trend even now, but back then it was like everyone was wearing them. Every influencer, every musician,
of
like
folklore.
it like draped over you, slightly like oversized cardigan. During like the height of summer, in the middle of July, everyone was like wearing these like thick wintry cardigans. And the fact that now that's become a recurring theme, even with Red. Even Red had its own cardigan. So no, it was huge when it was released. That cardigan, massive.
Another theme and one of folklore's main tropes that Taylor herself has confirmed in her very interesting Apple interview that she did with Zane Lowe not too long ago. She mentions that a main trope for folklore was conflict resolution, trying to figure out how to get through something with someone. And it's something that we discussed in our Evermore retrospective episode, where Evermore kind of has these conclusions to it, and folklore is more the battle to get to that conclusion. Other themes that we can pick apart is the feeling of grief. I've always said that folklore feels like an album that you can really grieve to. I don't know, that sounds kind of strange in a way. But
I agree. It's weird because it's so emotional and so sad, but then really helps you deal with that.
Yeah.
It's interesting, but there is a lot of grief in folklore and a lot of loss and kind of a lot of
in all different kind of ways. Like the grief of losing someone, but losing someone.
But then there is this kind of positivity slightly of escaping from all of that. I think that it's like you're grieving all this stuff, but then you're escaping from it. And being able to move on from that.
Exactly. There's like it's the pains of losing these things, like the theme that we've discussed a lot, the loss of the masters, the loss of innocence in a way, through Betty Cardigan.
And childhood and stuff.
Exactly, the loss of childhood, the loss of old friends, the loss of family members. But at the same time, like you said, I think you put that perfectly. There are like these little hidden nuggets of hope running through it, which then I think she very much develops in Evermore. For sure.
Oh, definitely, That's the thing. That's why they are sister albums, because they
they work so well together.
Yeah, they do continue the stories, wrap up certain things that are explored, and kind of definitely. I do agree with that. There is a lot of grief throughout the album, definitely.
Other themes that we've mentioned throughout as well have been nature and the idea of exploring nature, living out in nature, especially for the lakes. Fiction and fictional narratives, and of course personal songs on the other hand that are very much hidden and sometimes not so much hidden.
Now I'll quickly discuss some of the records and achievements of Folklore. So it earned the Guinness World Record for the most opening day streams for any album by a female artist. And this was quite a big moment really, because Taylor's always been, at this point, was always deemed as a physical artist rather than a streaming artist. Could sell incredibly well physically, but there was always a slight like, oh, is she that big on streaming? From Folklore onwards, she is now like huge on streaming and can, hit these massive streaming numbers as well as sell such big physicals. So this was quite a shock. I don't think anyone really expected it. I don't think maybe even Taylor really expected to have such a massive
It was
kind of
crazy.
debut, like 8.6 million debut on global Spotify. 80.6 debut. But yeah, no, it's mental. That's
it's crazy, but it's
many
true.
plays. And then Cardigan was also placed first on the global Spotify chart. It also had the biggest first day for a song by a female artist in 2020. And then Taylor became the first artist ever to debut at #1 on the Billboard 200, as well as the Billboard Hot 100 simultaneously with Cardigan and Folklore. However, Taylor has now done that 2 times since with Evermore and Red, Taylor's version. As well, the album was just received so well by critics as well as fans. So it was just it felt like such a massive moment for Taylor's career, and I think it just did wonders for Taylor's career because
It's
I
so
think she
funny
earned the
how,
respect she deserved for years.
yeah, as I was about to say, it's so funny how throughout her career, they always say, Taylor's peaked. Taylor's peaked at
Yeah.
Fearless. Taylor peaked at her songwriting in Red. Taylor peaked as a pop phenomena in 1989. Then she peaked with Reputation.
With like the biggest tour ever.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
but there's always something with her that she just finds these different ways and these different facets to show off what she has always been. She's always been an amazing songwriter. And like you said, people just, I don't know, people don't take pop very seriously in terms of songwriting. But she really, with Folklore, she really got to show off her songwriting skills. And at the same time, it was so well received by such a large portion of different people that it became something much more than just what it could have been in other circumstances.
Yeah, I agree. And talking about songwriter, Taylor then won the Apple Music Awards for Songwriter of the Year with Folklore, and then obviously won basically the most prestigious music award, which is the Grammy Album of the Year award, which I was so glad about. Like, so glad when Taylor won that. I was so worried watching those Grammys, and it was just like, oh no, she hasn't won that.
It was nerve-wracking.
She hasn't won that. It was just, and then the final one, it was just like, okay, maybe we have to admit defeat. And then it was like Folklore. It was like, yes. It was such
so glad.
Yeah,
she got
I was so glad, and I think everyone was so excited, and it's so well deserved. So yeah,
it was
definitely.
Because there's a lot of albums, like you said, Future Nostalgia was there, and Fine Line was there, and they did get kind of their dues at the Grammys and at other award shows. But I do think that Folklore was so deserved of Album of the Year for that year, because as we've said, as we've gone through it, I do think that we can confirm that it is the quintessential quarantine album. It really fit the moment perfectly. She explored so many things. She developed so many things. She opened up a lot of a genre that a lot of people hadn't really explored. And now many artists, when asked, like, what's your inspiration for your next album, or what's this, so many different artists from all different genres go back and say Folklore. Yeah. So I do think she was very deserving, and of course it marked that amazing milestone of becoming the first ever female artist to win the Grammy Award for Album of the Year 3 times.
Yeah, which is mental. That is such an achievement, and so well deserved. And yeah, such a nice way. It was such a nice way to just wrap up the kind of Folklore era, really.
Definitely.
And just her. It's just such a nice recognition, because that is like the most prestigious music award. That's the one that everyone wants, is Album of the Year. So to get that was such a cool moment. Okay, so thank you very much for listening to this episode. Both of us have absolutely loved diving back into the Folklore track list, era, announcement, and all of the fun Folklore-esque things. Both of us massively love this album, and just it's so cool being able to probably go in and just analyze all of it and discuss everything. So if you enjoyed this episode, make sure to give us a like on YouTube, follow us over on Instagram at Swiftly Spoken Podcast, and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is also Swiftly Spoken Podcast, and rate us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. And thanks again for listening.